I have with me another part of the story of the Myto story. We have Alejandro Dorenbaum from Reneo Pharmaceuticals. We'd like to welcome him to our broadcast. We are going to find out some really great things about what Reneo Pharmaceuticals is doing. So my first question is, Alex, can you tell us at a high level about Reneo Pharmaceuticals, its history, and your role involved?
Sure, and thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this program. So Reneo is a small clinical stage company that was founded about 3 years ago, and we're focused on therapies for patients with genetic mitochondrial diseases. Our goal is to improve daily functioning and quality of life in patients with these diseases, more specifically with primary mitochondrial myopathies. And we aim to really improve how the mitochondria work. And we believe that by doing this, we will be preserving muscle function, we will be improving daily life, prevent injury, weakness, and wasting in the muscle. And we have a very experienced team of drug developers who are really dedicated to, and we're very passionate about finding therapies for rare diseases. I am the Chief Medical Officer, and as such, I am responsible for overseeing the clinical trials in the company.
Wow. Okay. Well, then these next few questions are going to be easy for you.
I hope.
Yeah, you're going to do great. So are there currently any purposefully developed drugs on the market for mitochondrial disease?
You know, the short answer to that is no. But we are working really hard, and others are too, to change this.
So why is it so challenging to develop a drug or other therapies for mitochondrial disease?
Well, first, mitochondrial diseases are not common diseases. They're relatively rare. It's much easier to study diabetes, for instance, where there are thousands and thousands of patients, whereas with mitochondrial diseases, the number of patients that are available to participate in clinical trials is relatively limited. Also, there is significant variability in the patients, what their symptoms are, and even what is the severity of the symptoms that patients present with, even in patients who have exactly the same genetic defect. So this makes it difficult to study these diseases.
I see. So yeah, that does further complicate things. And so what is the process that a pharma company like Reneo follows to narrow its focus on a drug target? Like, for example, I've been told that there's a drug that's being developed called the REN 001.
Correct. Yeah. I think Reneo has a very interesting model. And by the way, this is not the first time we tackle a disease as a group of experts. We are a very dedicated group of experts that has done this. And the model for our company is, I think, a very interesting one. We look at big pharma, and we look at the drugs that they develop for large indications. And often, for business reasons, these companies decide not to continue development of those drugs. We look at those drugs very carefully, and we try to understand what is the mechanism of action of those drugs, and whether the mechanism of action would lend itself to treat a rare disease. Then we acquire those drugs from big pharma, and we apply them to the rare disease that big pharma would otherwise never do. The advantage of doing this is that we understand what is a lot about the drug, because big pharma has already done quite a lot of research with this drug. And when we bring it to treat rare diseases, we have a lot of information that we can take advantage of to design our trials and to anticipate what might happen. So that's what we have been doing with considerable success in several programs.
So you've indicated that being a smaller pharma yourself, why is it then that you have decided to focus on mitochondrial diseases?
Well, then again, this is based on our model of development. So we studied very carefully Reneo 1, the drug that we are testing. And what we understood from studying this drug is that this is a drug that stimulates mitochondrial function in the muscle. Once we understood that about Reneo 1, we look for rare diseases that big pharma would probably not treat and that could benefit from this particular mechanism of action. And mitochondrial myopathies were a clear opportunity for this drug to work based on its mechanism of action. So that's why we picked mitochondrial diseases.
And so here's my next question, and this is an opportunity for myself as well as the viewers to understand that there are, when you're developing a drug, I've been told that there are 3 phases that are required to do clinical trials. Can you explain what those three phases are?
Sure. In very broad terms, phase 1, 2, and 3 are the 3 well-described phases of drug development. There is phase 4 as well, once a drug is approved, to do more studies with that drug. But phase 1 is typically a small study where you are first and foremost testing the safety and the tolerability of the drug. It's limited to a small number of patients. You want to make sure that the drug is safe and it's well tolerated before you expand treatment into larger populations. In phase 1, you can sometimes also do the studies in the actual patients, or you can do them in healthy volunteers. If you do it in the patients, you could potentially learn about whether the drug may potentially work. Phase 2 typically is where you are doing the proof of concept trial, or where you are demonstrating that the drug is likely to work in the population of patients you want to study. And phase 3 is just the large clinical trials that are usually done to prove that a drug has good long-term safety and efficacy. Now, having said that, I have to caveat that occasionally, for rare diseases, you can combine, mix and match the phases of development. And this is because you don't have the luxury of thousands upon thousands of patients to do the research. So sometimes you have to test 2 or 3 hypotheses at the same time, or resolve problems that you need to resolve in one stage rather than in 2 stages. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so with that in mind, what stage is Ren 001 at this point?
So, as I said earlier, this drug had been tested by big pharma before, so we have phase 1 data for this drug, and having completed phase 1, we were able to quickly move into what we call a proof of concept trial. We recently completed the proof of concept trial, and now we're designing the phase 2-3 program, and we're hoping that we will be able to do that in a combined fashion as we move forward.
That's fantastic, and part of that is the patient engagement is a critical component of recruiting patients and administering the trials itself. How has COVID-19 impacted your current phases of development for Reneo?
The impact of COVID has been very significant. Patients with mitochondrial diseases are at risk of many complications, as you know, and we had to suspend visits to the clinic to prevent exposure to the virus. That affected our studies. Luckily, we had gathered enough information in our proof of concept study to be able to move forward. So we did not complete all of the study as we wish we had, but there was sufficient data gathered already when the COVID exploded for us to be able to stop, analyze that data, and feel comfortable that we can move forward.
Yeah, it's disruptive everywhere, and so it's just been it's interesting for our listeners to understand where it's affected you, and we appreciate you sharing that with us. So what role does patient advocacy organizations play in helping recruit patients, and how do you typically partner or interact with them to facilitate this?
Well, advocacy groups are very important, and not only to recruit patients. I think that thinking about advocacy groups as a supplier of patients is a very narrow way of thinking about them. I think advocacy groups are an essential part of drug development for rare diseases. In my opinion, the role of advocacy groups should be very comprehensive, and it should actually begin very early in development of a drug. I think that the interaction with advocacy groups has helped us review our own plans to make sure that we get early on the patient perspective on what is important to study. Also, it helps with education, not only of the patients and their families, but advocacy groups also educate physicians and healthcare workers, as well as the regulatory agencies that we interact with. So I think that, yes, we want advocacy groups to help us enroll patients into trials, and they do that really well. But the other functions that I outlined are equally important.
Okay. And thank you. And so what countries do you plan on to have the clinical trials set for REN 001?
So at the moment, we're considering the US, Canada. We're planning to open the trial in several countries in Europe and perhaps also Australia.
Okay. Well, MitoCanada has developed Team Myto using sport as a platform to raise awareness and funds for mitochondrial disease using the slogan, running for those who can't. Today, they will have 6 runners competing to attempt a new Guinness World Record for the most money raised whilst running a marathon distance. What words of motivation do you have to the people watching and the importance of the dollars needed to support research for new therapies and MitoCanada's mission?
Well, look, in this time when there is so much pain and suffering going on, it is easy to forget that there are many families, like the families that are living with mitochondrial diseases, that are still struggling to find a treatment and a cure for their disease. I think it is really important to continue to support these efforts, and no one does this better than organizations like MitoCanada. So all I can say is, if you can give, please give, and good luck to the runners.
Well, Alejandro, thank you so much for providing your perspective, and we really appreciate you taking the time to be able to share that with us. We hope you have a great day, and please follow along and enjoy those that are running for those that can't, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you again.